Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We have two terrific poets with us today, Marsha de la O and Miriam Sagan. Marsha will read first, and then Miriam. In Marsha de la O's new book, Creature, from Pit Poetry, embodiment is always on the verge of transformation. The poems find connection with other life forms, hawks, hummingbirds, pelicans, lizards, horses, squid. Martha explains, quote, I didn't want my skin to be on so tight. I wanted to overthrow unitary consciousness in favor of animal selves. After all, animal is derived from anima, which means soul. This is a project on moving into otherness, end of quote. Here's a brilliant, astonishing poet, Marsha de la O.
It's wonderful to be here. I have probably 9 or 10 poems to read. And they're a melange of poems from various books. I'm happy to read from Creature, but also, something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue. So we'll get started. This first one is called Possum. And it's a poem about when an animal comes into your life and stands in for something. Possum. And if I made a bad meal, if leftovers, my husband bent to scrape them into the bowl, summoning our hound for the favor of her indiscriminate desire, his brows scowling together. Yes, I'd open the door into the garage just to let the rancor out. The dog stood in for me, her mad, panicked barking. I was pregnant, thick with it, thought to become a woman, finally not that stick, that boy I'd always been. Instead, a heavy figure, forever wrong at dinner. He didn't want to be a father. And yes, I witnessed the improbable nest, a stranger's long labor. Boogie board nod to snowdrops lining the far corner. We came face to face, rich silver of her ruff, pink tail sprouting wiry hairs like a woman's bristled chin. A quick palsy ran through her shoulders, discovered. The possum must have known then I was her ruin. She met my gaze, lifting her plush and fragile nose. Against my belly wall, 3 rivers fed the blue placenta, little matter moored by cable, coiled in that water. She stood her ground, lips drawn back, teeth bared. Don't tell me what love endures or need requires. Don't tell me animals can't make mortal calculation. I knew she was carrying too, building bits of flesh that fall into the world. 13 teats for a litter of 24, the size of honeybees, scrabbling for the pouch. And if half of what we sow is strewn on barren ground, scorched, choked, devoured by birds, still, all must be born. Okay, so this reading, by the way, is the same reading I designed in September, then couldn't give because I had COVID. So I just went with whatever my impulses had been. This one is called Northern Lights and Sound. And it's about the scientists telling the people who lived in those latitudes that they weren't hearing anything when the northern lights flashed over them, because they didn't know, the scientists, what might have been the mechanism. Northern lights and sound. They said it was synesthesia. They said it was only human, no sound. They said, what folklore? And yet, it goes on ticking, this question of silence, of what's coming in on the solar wind. Is it possible to hear dreams that stream through the night sky at certain latitudes? Yes, I say. They're magnetically charged, like ghosts, like any room you walk into. Have you ever gone so far north that day never dawns? Have you gone to where the auroras sing their hissing songs, their sparks and clicks, claps and slaps, when air cracks open, when night swirls her ruffled skirts, her cloak of many colors? Is it the music you choose? Maybe, but why choose? Why not let color be sound, be stain, be scrim? Why not ask who ground the yarrow for ochre, brewed the spell to bind dark to light, painted the walls in this, our labyrinth? Storm is of the essence. The dancers under the hill. Can you see her scarves in the night? As you can see, that is also about human relationships. This next poem is an ekphrastic poem that I wrote in response to a Santa Barbara artist who does multiple paintings on the theme of loneliness. The poem is called Chinatown. Chinatown, my wish for, the 600 block, under the dragon arch, under the gold snake's hiss. You might be there, on the far edge of the plaza with your black hair, a raven's wing glancing, the scalloped roof lines candled in calligraphy of light. Once more we're astonished. Neon is noble. Dragon's blood spans the spectrum of red. Your eyes are a pair of blackbirds on the chain link fence, that mutable. If there were a way in the blue before the black tar heart of night sets in to set things right, if there were a perfect hour, tumbler turning, flakes of color falling in a new mandala, another system of prismatics, shapeshifter, queer sister, wouldn't I meet you here? Oh, my apparition, I swear by lotus root, star anise, ginger, the reek of fish. If there were words to change what happened, I'd speak them now. The next two poems are love poems directed towards my husband. And this first one is about glass squid, who are small, almost invisible squid who try never to be seen and cloak themselves as much as possible by diving as deep as possible and creating a color around them that is the color of the darkness of the deepest part of the ocean. Invisibility cloak. Call me purple. Call desire a tangled skein. Say it lives in every tentacle. Do you care much for the lonely alone in the sea? I've been trying to plumb the deep. I've been trying to disappear. Glass squid dive 1,000 meters, light down on the edge of light. The idea is simple. We all need chaos or a fellow shade the same nebulous shape, which is to say, I'd like to slide under your cape. You, with your leaky fiber optics. You, with your smidge of sun. I want to be the violet that melts into your night. On this next poem, which is also from my husband, Phil Taggart, is another love poem that uses mushrooms and the underground relationship the filaments have with growths of trees and a deal where they exchange nutrients. It's called A Field of Energy Knits You to Earth. One explanation could be I've gone fungal over the years. My filaments, a silver script round your holdfast. And both of us up for the deal. Your sugar for vital minerals in return. Do you believe that's the reason I protect you the way I do? You would be wrong. Silky mycelium is also a language for silent rootstock. When a fruiting chanterelle knocks on the door of the earth, the door opens. When a tree falls in a faraway forest, your ears prick up. You know what it's like to be sawed through. You know what an axe is. You hear the quiet creaking. We all live in the gracious shadow of one mother tree or another. Just as a mushroom loves night moisture and morning mist, so too a mushroom loves mystery. That's how I love you. The next poem also has to do with the theme of love, but it's about growing up in a family and relationships between sisters. It's called How We Learn to Love. This morning's wind is brutal, slapping the face of my rose. She isn't used to it, and a stipple of bruise breaks out on pink petals. Rose that I love for all the wrong reasons, the way you too have loved. And didn't mother get after us both, sister of mine? Because it resembles a camellia and is called simplicity, and nothing like a fist or breast. It puts me in mind of China. We grew up in the same garden. That's not simple either. I love another too, a miniature on the left, yellow, bought from a Rosarian at the fair who begged me to take it. He raised it from a tiny cutting and thought I was the right one, even though I warned him, Mister, I got nothing but shadow. You'll find a place, he kept saying. I paid him, and I did. This next poem is also from my sister, who recently received a difficult diagnosis. It's called Remember. Remember the dirt path into the hills where the road ended, sumac, black sage, and witch's hair overtaking the scrub after rain, their blades of ochre and metallic orange, all beyond our mother's call. Home was where we returned at dusk, where we went to defend ourselves, to claim what we could of our portion. All 7 of us at the table, the dog beneath, 14 elbows that never learned to keep off the laminate. And you, the dancer, the best wicked funny munchkin outside of us, the delicate one. Do you remember the thunderstorm that night? Us in our bunk beds in the corner of the garage our father shaped into an extra room. You were crying, and our father's voice came over the intercom saying, think of ponies, Jaybird, but you couldn't. Each struck flash of lightning set off a new wail. I was useless, didn't know how to help. And our father came down the stairs through the rain and carried you back up. Remember, little bird? And we have seen the sycamore, blotchy limbs of ivory and taupe, that sycamore stripped of leaves but for crows, and at its highest point, the gossip crow, crying, shame, crying, look, take note, crying, scheme. And we have seen the chandelier of light through cottonwood, the river as jewel trap, as flowing skin in tremula, as shimmer. How time harrows us, little bird. How love does the same. Aren't we entangled, all of us, in the scheme? Our harm, our hope, our people? Should we call it errant, that gene in its cluster, its place on the staircase, there from the beginning, one small star in a heaven of stars, in the constellated night that made you radiant and trackless? That poem is an unpublished poem. And so is this next one, which is a poem for an important person to me, who was the former art critic of the New York Times. His name was Peter Sheldal, and he passed away about a year or two ago. And I really loved his art criticism. And this is also for the Virgin of Guadalupe, because December 12th is coming up, and that is the day that she is celebrated in all of Mexico and also in all of the areas where people from Mexico exist, so that counts for here. It's called Flying Over Ventura with the Ghost of a Singular Art Critic, and it's for Peter Sheldal. It has an epigraph by John Keats. Beauty is truth, truth, beauty. That is all you know on earth and all you need to know. Late morning under clouds, a jagged trail of light on the surface of ocean, ash blue, white gold. And there, a glittering wake line left by a trawler. How glittering takes us, Peter, and silence. You hear yourself breathing. You hear the absence of speech. Enough quiet to listen to the red roof tiles of the mission, whispering. Tiles tightly laid like a phalanx. Red jacketed soldiers defending the shadows. And though I can't see her, she's there in the shadows, awakening me with a twinge in my chest, Guadalupe. Not strong, but fragile, thin beneath her stone clothing, a sorrowing look on her face. What a fuss I've made in my life with my icons and statuettes, trying to build a merciful mother. If you knew me, you'd know that. She's whispering too. I can even hear the far drawl of the waves, their low mutter of perfect inhumanity, their otherness drawing breath with the boulders on the hillside. Guadalupe perhaps prefers shadows. You rehabilitated beauty for me in words I thought could not be other than true. She is troubled by radiance. She was there. She witnessed when they would apply the whip. Never the priest, always a tribal leader brought in, forced. Never more than 25 lashes for a single offense. That was their mercy. She saw it, always in the name of the Lord and truth, beauty, civilization. It's hard to use those words, to write or say them. But I have to ask, does it trouble you, Peter, how avid we are with our eyes, the shameless way we go all in for beauty and overlook truth? And for my final poem, I'm going to read To Have a Body. To have a body. Leaning into the curve, knowing I'm sliding out of control, a fine grain rain shifting onto the sheen of asphalt. Lupin holding its violet breath, ryegrass stiffened and gold as the motorcycle slides by. I am the burr on its saddle, hanging on. I could have dumped it, but I was afraid. And who wouldn't want the possibility of riding the last arc out to the end with the clouds parsing the sky into simple subjects, simple predicates? I'm flying out of myself. Swimming in a lake, the women are ashamed to be seen in their suits. So we don't look at one another as we step gingerly in, the bottoms uncertain, and then the plunge into nowhere, that spacious chamber where I can rest. Soft ruby light, all the mackerel return to the sea, that shimmer, that shimmy, and then darting free. Fish in all oceans kiss underwater, they don't choke. A police car blinks and talks to itself, question of circumstance, question of guilt, and now the trussing with ropes. All the attendants leaning in, urging me back. I'm trying to respond, thinking I have to choose my body. God chose to have a body, so why shouldn't I take back this one on the dark slab? And if I can, why wouldn't he have picked any mewling Christ? But sometimes I've seen Jesus on votive candles, spikes searing his temples red, his head turned, his white blank face staring off, eyes almost opaque, so I can picture regret, And it is a hard choice. With the onset of night, faster than a man can walk, the form finally seemed sewn tighter than the smallest hand, and yet a clear sensation of separation. His face blind and radiant as a Coleman lantern with the shattering begun. It's endless, this time of shattering. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Marsha. Your poetry is radiant. Use that poem in there about your daughter, your sister, but you just have such sagaciousness within and without the human body, the connections between others, including animals, and also there's a vastness in what you see and a scientific aspect to it too, but there's also such a deep poignancy and a deep heart within your poetry, and your narratives are just they just keep going. There's such an urgency in your writing, and I always appreciate how you work on one area for a while on one of your books, and then you go to another, and you're really an amazing poet. And we just have a couple minutes left. Could you just take one of your poems? It could be a poem to your sister, it could be the last one, or it could be Chinatown, and just tell us how you got that poem began and how you went through it, how you put it together. Do you rewrite, or what? You just have such a vastness, and yet it's so here and now, but it's tangible, but the intangible. All of your great imaginative uses of language. Marsha?
Thank you so much. I guess I would say that I'm looking at the poem to my sister, the one that's called Remember. And I would say that it started just with that memory of living near Chaparral and how we could go there and how it was wild and how it was safe. And my sister is dealing, with a dangerous situation, medically speaking. And so it started there, and then I just followed it out, and it's multiple revisions as I shaped it into where it ended with those genes in their cluster, and whether or not that has to do with the illness is unclear. But I could end with radiance and all the stars in heaven. That's the way I love her.
Your poetry is loving. It's elegiac. It's beyond, just the here and now. You take us into such deep places where we're all still connected, no matter how far you go into the intangible. You always keep us connected with humanity. And so it's really, you're a blessing. Your poetry is a blessing. So Marsha de la O, I'm grateful to have you on the show, and I love your poetry. So thank you once again, Marsha de la O.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here.
Thank you. Miriam Sagan is the author of over 30 books of poetry, fiction, and memoir. Her most recent include Castaway, Red Mountain 2023, and Thanks for Stopping By, Blue Edge 2024. She is a two-time winner of the New Mexico, Arizona Book Awards, as well as a recipient of the City of Santa Fe Mayor's Award for Excellence in the Arts and a New Mexico Literary Arts Gratitude Award. She has been a writer in residence in 4 national parks at Yaddo and McDowell, Gilkistan in Iceland, Kura Studio in Japan, and a dozen more remote and interesting places. She works with text and sculptural installation as part of the mother-daughter creative team, Maternal Mitochondria, with Isabel Winston Sagan, in venues ranging from RV parks to galleries. She founded and directed the creative writing program at Santa Fe Community College until her retirement. Here's an outstanding poet, Miriam Sagan.
Thank you so much. And Marsha, thank you for reading. It was a pleasure. And it took me into the poetry mode, which is a great place to be. I do sometimes think that, all of my poetry, starting when I'm 14 and now I'm 70, is a way of trying to understand how the self is situated in the world. And part of that is about names. I often get asked about my last name, and I'm just going to tell the truth about it for once. This is from a book called Stargazing, and you'll see why in a minute. Cosmos. Am I related to this guy, Carl Sagan? And who is he? My daughter wants to know. Yes, I say, a famous, very famous astronomer, and I think he is your second cousin once removed, because he was my father's second cousin. My grandfather was his great uncle, or so we've been told. Like many things, he was forbidden to us. My father, the atheist, kept a kind of kosher. Carl Jung, no. Karl Marx, yes. Freud, yes. Lenin, maybe. At least he once told me, the end justifies the means. But I was a child and helpless, and I knew he was lying. And for some reason, Carl Sagan, no. Although his mother had been a union organizer and my grandfather a factory owner, but somehow we weren't rooting for her. When my brother was in grade school, he wrote our Carl asking, send me pictures of Venus for a school report. And miraculously, a large manila envelope appeared full of brilliantly colored, high-resolution planets. On his deathbed, Carl told my first cousin, you aren't really Sagans. Something about Ellis Island and a brother-in-law's last name. The Sagans are the smart ones. Who could quarrel with that assessment? The famous astronomer, handsome and troublesome like my father, made the last name that isn't really ours so well known that at the cash register, people still ask me and say, billions and billions. And I always laugh and say, yes, and stars. I actually really do love the night sky and astronomy and all of its, ways that it can influence literature. And I am sort of, I have a soft spot for having my fortune told and that kind of thing. And so I wrote my own horoscope. Tiny planets fell into the flower pot. The house I was born in appeared in my dreams. The astrologer said my chart showed sensuality, then kissed me. The caller was anonymous, but I was expecting the ant guy. It was raining inside the house. Tiny planets rose on my fingernails. The guy was to get rid of ants, not deliver them. It was snowing in the house of money, coffee, and grief. The palm reader said I had a vitamin deficiency. My father said I'd never get into a good college. Tiny planets fell like raw sugar into my orange pico tea. My friends crossed from the house of reminiscence into the house of regret. Ants carried away the tiny planets and brought one perfect turquoise bead to the surface of the earth. Here in New Mexico, people say that if you watch an anthill, eventually some kind of archaeological artifact will come up. And I've spent hours looking at anthills. I never saw anything. So I just put it in my poem as if it might happen. The next poems I'm going to read are from a recent book called Thanks for Stopping By. And these poems kind of run into each other. They were written in sort of a white heat, and they're connected. And this one's about friends of mine who took me to walk the labyrinth in front of the cathedral dedicated to St. Francis, of course, because Santa Fe is the city of St. Francis. And I must have been in this cathedral hundreds of times, but never paid attention to the labyrinth that was at ground level outside. Walking the labyrinth barefoot, only one way in and one way out, passing my friends, each going at her own pace, in the city that is mine, outside the cathedral that is not mine. Looking up, I see tourists snapping photos of us. We must look like serious penitents heading for Jerusalem in the center. Things seem to speed up, closer to the end. Two plump young girls have appeared on the cathedral steps in elaborate purple gauze gowns on a Monday morning, and the rows of Sharon tree sheds its white and blood-red blossoms, petals falling on an empty pair of discarded sandals. Of course, the poem preserves what I myself might forget, like those sandals, which I thought belonged to my friend Lucy, but no, she said they weren't. They were somebody else's. So there's that incursion of other people, realities, sensitivities, kind of into being the observer. And that to me is what's exciting about being able to write. In this book, which has some dark thematic material about ill health and mortality, I was getting very curious about the idea of hope. Is hope good for us? Is optimism good? Or do we then suffer more from despair? Or is it false? Or is the person who can't hope just kind of, like a no-win situation? You should learn to hope. So I created a character, a persona in the poems, and her name is Nadezhda, which is Russian for hope. And she appears in several of the poems, kind of trying to work out my feelings about hopefulness. And this poem also references the life of the Russian poet Osip Mandelstam, whose poems were preserved by his wife, whose name is Nadezhda. This is in the 30s, preserved in the way that's explained in the poem. Nadezhda hides the poems in the soup pot as the secret police bang on the door. Being men, they do not find the manuscript, but send the poet to the gulag, where he dies quickly. Nadezhda gets letters from people who survived saying he was kind-hearted, cheerful even, like priests of the old religion and the true communists. When she herself is old, Nadezhda sits in the drafty apartment without a river view and begins to write her memoir. Life is not as easy as crossing a field, and crossing a field isn't that easy. That is a Russian proverb, the first part of it. Life is not as easy as crossing a field. So a lot of reminiscence in this book, things that come in and I just allowed them without giving them a full critique, like, why have you arrived? This particular memory, shoo. I decided to indulge whatever came into the field during the months of writing. After my first husband died and I was alone with the child, I was vigilant, kept my hair washed and slept in my clothes in case she spiked a fever in the night or we had to go to the ER. In those years, I tried to keep other things alive, a dwarf peach tree, a notion of how bodhisattvas behave, memory, a watered down kind of hope, but still the fruit trees went down in the drought. There's probably drought or rain in pretty much, any poem written in New Mexico these days. Amphoras under turquoise water, covered in barnacles, still might seal in ancient wine, although undrinkable today. A shipwreck's cargo now housing octopuses. Please tell me it was Atlantis that once stored them before the sea rose or the city fell, or a message from inside the body changed everything and nothing, and how the hot spots on the scan do not make anyone a different person. So don't ask me how I am, for when it is time to part, we'll stand together at the barrier gate to the frontier, and one of us will go forward and the other will turn and go back. I had a residency in probably the strangest place I ever was. It was out in Great Basin with Center for Land Use Interpretation. And Great Basin is a bombing range. It's where it's an old Air Force base. It's where the Enola Gay, which dropped the bomb on Hiroshima, was built. It's a tremendously haunted, arid landscape. And I was there alone in what was called a living pod, which was a kind of tiny trailer that had been an art classes project. It was very exceptional and odd housing, alone by myself for several weeks. And I was writing about the historical implications of it. Coyotes howl. I smell the wood smoke of the only neighbor squatting in an abandoned barracks in Wendover and hear the bark a dog makes on a chain. The discoverer of fission hides a Jewish pianist in his Berlin apartment. Napalm means sticky fire. Wife of the inventor of poison gas, to control a city without occupation, kills herself. This is the mind, and this is my problem. And this is Venus rising and setting, and a guard tower, and the moon, and a darkness that is both bombing range and empty space. And don't ask me, I don't know the answer. And each of us with our many ancestors. I had a mild disagreement with my editor at Blue Edge, a person I adore, who's a great editor, but she was like, I don't understand that last line, each of us with our many ancestors. And you could just end that poem with, I don't know the answer, but I think that there's these very long lines of action, history, karma, if you will, and I wanted that included. Plus my ancestors, they just never go away. I gave a reading with a young poet recently who said, well, my father's not here, but I'll read a poem about him. And I was like, my parents are long dead, but they are always here. And I'll read one a little bit about their relationship and about my mother. My mother liked jigsaw puzzles, a round one on the dining room table, Piera della Francesca's Madonna and Child, while the household chaos raged around her, and my father, importantly occupied, scorned her waste of time. There must have been a puzzle, too, of birches and snow, the purple shadows, particularly tricky, because today on the Yellow Mountain, the aspen forest also seemed like a jigsaw, as do the shortening days. No nimble fingers can quite fit together. Sort of appropriate as we come in towards solstice. And here's a poem about my neighborhood, where I've lived for 40 years. And it's what we call the unfashionable part of Santa Fe. I'm very fond of it. Every poem on the west side is full of flapping black crows. They might even be ravens, except for this poem in which everything has flown. The silver canary sings in the hanging cage on the porch by the stream in Cundio, hamlet of little bells. I left the cage door open on purpose. This bird has flown. I don't know if a hawk got it or if it flew all the way to the Dolores, a warm avenue of palm trees full of escaped parakeets, chatting blue and green. All I know is that this bird has flown. I'll read you another poem about Nadezhda, my persona for hope, and she moves around a fair amount in history. She's not, although she seems to be staying in Eastern Europe, where, of course, my ancestors are from. But this is a poem written about the war in Bosnia and about an account that I read that mesmerized me. And it's also about being an old lady very profoundly. And I don't think this is usual, but the kind of courage that bestows upon a person. Nadezhda remembers the snipers in the heights during the Civil War. In the apartment blocks, the neighbors on each stairwell banded together. One would go to the market, chasing rumors of bread, load up the string bags, return if it was quiet, or even under the rattle of bullets. Very old ladies were the first to volunteer, arthritic, widowed, plagued by angina, thankless grown children. Yes, they wanted to eat, but not necessarily to live, which made them appear brave compared to the hopeful young. Nadezhda did not approve of this, but she ate the bread anyway. So sort of the more I got with Nadezhda, the more I realized that, she didn't really approve of me basically at all because she believes in hope. So I gave her her voice because it made me happy to do that. Now one for my father. My father liked the Yiddish word Rachmanis. What's not to like? It means pity, which means compassion. He told me, When you grieve, some people feel fear, some feel pity. He said this after the funeral of a girl he'd known as a baby, heroin overdose, suicide, buried in a pink coffin. My father said, keep away from those who are afraid. Stick with those who feel Rachmanis. And I think probably you've all had that experience where someone has said something to you that's very important that you rely upon, but you don't actually ever formally communicate. So I wanted to put that out. I'll read just a few more, maybe 2 or 3. Sometimes it takes a soft night snowfall to remind me things that go away never come back. All my friends know this is true, yet no one will talk about it. Reading a poem aloud in Spanish, a language in which I know only 2 words, Nevada and Lamentar, I keep myself company on the unmade bed. You've gone out, I stay home. Everyone knows it will soon be the exact opposite, but no one listens when I try to talk about it. There's a kind of a fake thing, because of course I know more than 2 words in Spanish. And I was reading Federico Garcia Lorca in a bilingual edition and sort of stealing his vocabulary, putting down words that I liked. And then there's a kind of exaggeration in poetry that has more truth than just kind of going along in the mundane. And if I can get away with it, then I'm super happy to use it. Silverfish in a golden net. Refugee must climb the Pyrenees to a place of safety. Still will die en route, coughing in a fever. Mount Meru seems to rise inches every 1,000 years. At its peak, fossilized seashells of this oceanic earth, golden fish in a silver net. And to conclude, I'm going to read a poem about the border. New Mexico, of course, is a border state, and the border has been very important to me in every way. Its culture, what I've learned from its literature, its music. It's a place that has a lot of chaos and suffering, and something that, we're aware of in the sanctuary city of Santa Fe. And I also love the idea of borders. And I think it's because I grew up in New Jersey. I was born in Manhattan, and then there's the Hudson River, which makes this incredible border. And then as a young person, I'm on the other side. And just this extraordinary sense of liminality and how do you cross a border? Of course, all 4 of my grandparents being immigrants, that's important to me too. So this is just about being down in southern Arizona in the old hotel on the border. Tiffany style stained glass, saguaro cactus against purple desert, looks perfectly Art Deco. What am I waiting for? A message in a bottle? I'm still standing here, citizen of the country I was born in. Darkness wells up out of the Chiricahua Mountains. Slowly, the lights of the little towns go out, one by one, like morning stars. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. Your poetry is personal, it's precise, you're compassionate, family, what you see, what you go through, it's elemental, but it's transcendent. You see what's in front of you, and then it's historical too. And your sense of landscape is always very vivid. So thank you very much for such a outstanding reader. I have a couple of questions for you.
Sure.
When did you write your first poem?
I probably wrote my first poem, not the world's greatest poem, in the 6th grade. I have very severe dyslexia. I have had it my whole life, and I had a teacher, I can remember her name, Miss Pinnell. In the 6th grade, she tried to teach me to spell. I could not spell, which is apparent to today. And she tried to teach me to write a poem. And I wrote a poem, was 4-line quatrain rhymed, and it got published in a magazine about teaching children how to write poems, right? So it was pretty obvious at that point that my destiny was split between not being able to spell, but being able to rhyme at that point and to write a poem. So that would have been the first one. I got very serious when I was 16, and serious but clueless. I was like, I want to be a poet. What do poets do? Huh. Well, excellent question. So I got a notebook. I mean, I'm like a sophomore in high school, right? And every day I write a poem every day. And I had good access to a great bookstore at 179th Street in New York. And I would go every Saturday with my allowance and I'd buy a New Directions book and I'd read it I had no idea what I was reading. I just read, right? I mean, some of it was Kenneth Rexroth. I mean, some of it was good choices and some of it was essentially incomprehensible. I just was very dutiful. So I wrote my poem every day. I read my book every week. And I would say this held up nicely. My methodology has not changed.
Well, who were some of the poets who influenced you before you began writing in a serious, regular way?
Well, I don't know how true this is. It's a great question. I don't know how true this is for children, but I was mesmerized by Mother Goose. I mean, I could not stand still. There was an old woman tossed up in a basket 17 times as high as the moon. You had me. I wanted to know. It was magic to me. And also, this is like the 60s. And so a friend of my dad sent him a record of somebody named Joan Baez. We were in New Jersey. We didn't know anything. And she sang child ballads. And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe those revenge and murder ballads. I memorized them. So very ancient in English, early root, right? 16th century, 17th century, the primal cadence of English was just, I didn't find out till I was a grown-up that not everybody had memory, could recite Mother Goose for hours. It captured me.
I also noticed that you live in Santa Fe or near, you talked about Santa Fe. How has the landscape of Santa Fe affected your writing?
Well, it was a revelation. I mean, I was raised back east. I was living in San Francisco when I came here, but the quality of emptiness, it terrified me. It was I had just plain straight up agoraphobia. And then I had to make friends with it. I've been here for 40 years, my entire adult life, right? And it's inseparable. I mean, I love it madly.
I know two people. One still lives there, and one just moved into MPTF a while back, and she used the second one used that term magical. There's something about the Santa Fe area that's magical. And so, how long did you live? What years did you live in San Francisco, and for how long?
80 to 84. A turbulent time, a very exciting time, and then AIDS, very devastating time. And I was just there. I mean, I thought, why did I leave? You know what I mean? It was like, this place is perfect. Then I came back and the longing left me. I was happy to be home.
Well, obviously, we all know San Francisco has such a thriving poetry scene they were, that was the first literary scene in California way before LA, because basically they had a natural harbor where all the ships from other places would come in there and influence the people who were there. And there were other ingredients, obviously. But now you live in Santa Fe. Could you tell us a little bit about the poetry scene or community that you experience in Santa Fe?
I would say it's an incredibly vibrant community. When I first came here, there were a handful of interesting poets: Arthur Z, Joan Logie, Leo Romero, May Bretzenbrug. But they have now become, the names on the library, in that there's huge poetry scenes in all along the Rio Grande, particularly Albuquerque's got a thriving kind of stand-up slam scene, but very widespread and creative. And Santa Fe has dozens and dozens of poets. It used to be, Harry, I knew everybody, right? And I don't know everybody, and I don't know their literary offspring anymore. And then Taos, of course, is very beat influenced. It had the Taos Poetry Circus. And Philip Whalen, who was one of the original Gallery 6 readers in San Francisco Renaissance, was here for a few years when I first came. And I think he was an influence. And Robert Creeley taught at University of New Mexico for many years. He taught Joy Harjo, he taught Simon Ortiz, and his way of sort of tying the poem to your natural speaking line. I think that everybody kind of inherited that, whether they are aware of it or not here.
Well, you do that. And what advice would you give to a young woman who's sitting down to write a poem for the first time? What would you tell her to focus on?
Oh, that's a great question. But the main thing is I tell her to focus. To focus, because there's a tendency to focus on good and bad, to have everybody breathing down your neck, dead great poets, your mean aunt, you know what I mean? And your own self-doubt. So in a way, if you can build up the quality of almost like a concentration or a samadhi, like a meditative quality of not paying attention to every fear that you have, to every inhibition that you have, something will open to you. It really will. English has this, well, all languages has this incredible stream of poetry, right? From Shakespeare to placing a coffee order. It's the same language, right? And so I would say, try to focus so you can find your wave. And once you hit your wave, stay upright as long as possible.
And what do you do when you sit down to write? What kicks off a poem within you? Is it a phrase, a word, an image? What is it?
It's usually a feeling almost that the poem already exists and that I am trying to catch it before it vanishes. So I tend to write very fast. If I tend to not revise hugely. If I can't get it to work, I toss it, which makes some people's blood run cold. But, I was inspired by visual artists who will, let's say, run a series of sequential prints and take some out, because it's really great to reduce. So I'll work fast, then I'll leave it alone, then I'll fidget with it. But if at that point it doesn't feel like its form is intact, I'll probably give it up. It might come back to haunt me later on, right? I might get another chance. But it's a fast process. Maybe when I was starting off, I used to write 15 to 30 revisions and clip them to show myself that I could work. But now it's much less than that.
Well, thank you very much, Miriam. Another show comes along at 2:00, Cinephiles. And so I just want to thank Miriam Sagan and Marsha De La O for a superlative poetry hour. You both of your poetry is just fabulous. So thank you. And I am going to make an announcement. Next Tuesday, the wonderful poets Ellen Mabee, PJ Swift, and poet publisher Daniel Yaron will be with us. So thank you very much.